Ever since the invention of the radio, even before the invention of television, there has always been a call for what are referred to as situational comedies. We call them sitcoms. I don't know if you knew that that's what sitcoms was short for. I didn't, and I learned something fun, so there you go. But there's always been a place for about half an hour long comedies that have relatable problems, and we get to watch the zany, wacky ways that our favorite characters get out of those problems. They're probably, still to this day, the most picked up shows by networks. Probably the only things that come close to it are medical dramas and reality television. But sitcoms are relatively, especially early on, relatively inexpensive to produce. But if they hit, they will continue to churn out money long after the show has run its course. Chances are good, because of the length of time that sitcoms have been a thing, that you probably have a favorite of your own. I think all of us have those sitcoms that we love watching. Maybe it's one that holds fond memories with your parents growing up, or your grandparents even, and you just remember them every time you watch it. Maybe it's because they've got characters that you find yourself relating to more than others. Or maybe it's just a show that for one reason or another, it just has some significance to you. And you watch it no matter how many times you've seen those episodes. Maybe for you, your favorite is I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners, The Andy Griffith Show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, The Bob Newhart Show, Get Smart, The Odd Couple, MASH, Three's Company, All in the Family, Taxi, Golden Girls, Happy Days, Mork and Mindy, Family Ties, Married with Children, Murphy Brown, Seinfeld, Frasier, Full House, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, That 70s Show, Third Rock from the Sun, Scrubs, 30 Rock, Everybody Loves Raymond, Malcolm in the Middle, Parks and Recreation, Community, Arrested Development, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Superstore, How I Met Your Mother, My Name is Earl, Two and a Half Men, New Girl, or The Office. These are good. You have a favorite just in that list. That was just off the top of my head. But really, it's not surprising to know why sitcoms tend to be the most popular shows whenever they're on television. They're something that is relatable for all of us. We like to see ourselves on screen, in essence, and that's why we have those characters that we will kind of relate to very easily. Sitcoms allow us to kind of escape from the everyday pressures of life and just have a moment to laugh and to just get away and to find ourselves connecting with these characters. But there's an element of sitcoms that I think speaks to something deeper within us. There's an element of why sitcoms tend to be so popular that really connects with something that is ingrained within each and every one of us. And to see what that is, I don't think that we have to look any further than one of the biggest sitcoms in all of television history, Cheers. It's really hard to understate just how wildly popular Cheers was when it was on the air for the first time, and still maintains its popularity to this day. In fact, I think a couple of years ago at the Emmys, they had like a Cheers reunion, and the audience went nuts because this show was so wildly popular. Millions of people every week would tune in to hear what wild thing Cliff was going to say that week, or to see how Carla was going to treat, or let's be honest, mistreat the customers of Cheers. They would want to see what kind of down-home spun wisdom Woody had for him. Or maybe he just wanted to yell with everybody else, Norm! Thanks, BL. I knew somebody would join me on it, I'm so glad. Of course, we can't forget the will they, won't they of Sam and Diane, but there was something about Cheers that just connected with people. It was a place where people could go and kind of share their problems. When we were watching Cheers, we were watching a group of people. They would be able to go to Cheers to share their problems that they were going through, to find help, support, encouragement. I'll even go so far as to say love from the other members of Cheers. Week after week, we would see as somebody would have a new problem, and by the end of the episode, the group of Cheers would have come alongside of them to help them get through that issue. You don't even have to go past the opening credits to see why it was so attractive to audiences around the world. If you somehow have forgotten the entrance and the opening credits of Cheers, the lyrics go where everybody knows your name, and we always forget this part, and they're always glad you came. You want to be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You want to be where everybody knows your name. True story, when the girls were very, very little, I think they were less than 6 months, I was watching through Cheers, just, kind of for myself. And every time we'd have a little, little toddler thing that we'd set Robin in, because she was much more comfortable and happy in that than Adrian ever was. Adrian constantly had to be held. But we would set Robin in there, and every time it would build up to that entrance song, Robin would start jumping and dancing. And so even at 6, 7 months old, that kid loved Cheers. I don't think she's ever seen an episode since then. But anyway, but there was something about this notion of a place where people could go and unburden themselves of the struggles that each and every one of us face and find a sense of belonging and find a connection with the people around them. How could something like that not be attractive? It's really one of the reasons why the finale of Cheers was viewed by an estimated 93 million Americans. At a time period when the general population, I'd look for the actual numbers, but it was estimated to be around 187 million people. So literally half the nation watched the finale of Cheers, watched as this community that we had seen built up over said goodbye. It's a show that still holds significant meaning because at its core, it really touched on something that we are all looking for, and that is a sense of community. The need for community is actually really amongst our most basic human needs. It's something that each and every one of us recognizes that we need in our own life, is a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of knowing that there are people who and care about what we're going through and want to help us with our problems and want to share their problems with us as well. Obviously, food, water, shelter, they'd be a little higher on our list of our physical needs, but we also know that we have a deep need for friendship, for companionship with other people we feel comfortable with, that we know we can share our problems with without fear of judgment or rejection from them. That we also want to be able to help them guide through their problems. That we want to come alongside of them to be a part of what's going on. It's something that nurtures us. It's something that helps build us up, and it's part of our development as human beings. Research indicates that people who have a sense of community tend to have pretty solid mental health. They're less stressed. They have a greater sense of self-worth. They're less prone to depression. But people who feel the opposite are very depressed. People who feel isolated from the rest of the world around them, they tend to feel cut off. They feel lonely. They feel depressed. They feel like they're not worth anything. In fact, some current research indicates that having a sense of community and a sense of belonging is also good for your physical health. Because you have less stress, that means that your blood pressure tends to be lower. They also have, for some reason, tend to have lower cholesterol than people who have an isolation or loneliness. And it actually, having a sense of community can create. I thought that was interesting. That this is something that is good for our mental health and our physical health as well. That community is such a part of us that when we have that, it has only significant benefits to our lives and very few negatives to it. This need for belonging and this need for community and this need for encouragement that is within all of us, it is something that is there from our earliest stages in life. In 1945, and this study looked at infants. And they looked at a separate group of infants than what we're typically used to. These were infants that were growing up in institutions rather than traditional family homes. I want to give you a quick word of warning. It is Mother's Day. We are talking about babies. Some of you may not like some of the findings of this particular study. All of the infants that were there, all of their physical needs were met. I want to get that out of the way first, that they were fed, they were changed, everything physically that an infant needs was met by each and every baby. However, some of the institutions that were observed did not have the staff on hand to be able to give every child the full attention that it needed in order to continue on in its development. Those children that were lucky enough to have ample attention given to them by the staff that was on hand tended to be happier. Their development was on track for their age. They gained weight appropriately. But the infants that were not socially nurtured, many of them showed symptoms akin to depression. They were developmentally behind, and they were noticeably unhealthy, even to the point some perished. Again, every physical need that they had was met. The only thing that was different was the amount of care and attention that these infants were given. So even from our earliest stages of life, there is a need for community, a need for connection within each of us. This need for longing and community is something that we have throughout our entire lives. It never goes away. It never leaves us entirely. We seemingly have to have a need of others who will come alongside of us, who will provide care and support for us. I myself have actually seen several times folks who have been living at home by themselves, physically unable to go places. Once their care reaches a point where they have to go into a nursing home or a facility where they're surrounded by other people, they actually improve. There was a lady in my last church who was dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, and it was terrible. And when she was at home with just her and her husband, just there the entire time, she was regressing terribly. But once they took her and brought her into a nursing home, she was a whole new woman. That need for community and surrounding ourselves by people, it never truly goes away. And so people will seek out a community in any way, shape, or form that they can. They will find that sense of community in any place that they can. Some people will so desperately look for it that they will turn the earth on its head, trying to find a place to connect and belong. They'll look in person, they'll look online, they'll look in groups, they'll look in fandoms, they'll look for it anywhere that they possibly can, yes, including bars. Trying to find some group of people where they can connect with, that they can belong to, that they can be in part of. And sometimes that sense of community that they find is found in places that are frankly unhealthy. Research seems to indicate that even those people who be in places that we might consider to be unhealthy will still remain there even if they disagree with the ideology of the rest of the group. They will stay in those places because they feel connected. They feel belonged. They feel like they're accepted. And it's probably right about here, as I've been speaking ever so passionately about our need for community and how some people will find it in unhealthy places, that you may be asking yourselves, well, why don't they go to church? Church should be where they find community, right? Where they find a healthy connection and a healthy community with other people. And it's here where I got to hurt your feelings, because they tried. They tried. I'm completely aware that some of you in this room here, maybe this is probably the first time I've seen some of you, and I'm going to guess that for some of you, you've tried. But when they came to that church, they instead of finding community and finding acceptance, instead of finding belonging, they found rejection. They found judgment. They felt ostracized. They left feeling lonelier than when they came in. If that is you, please know that my heart breaks for you. And I am so incredibly sorry that that's what you experienced when you came to the church, looking for a sense of community, looking for a chance to belong, and instead faced more rejection. The church has not done a great job of building community, but please understand the church always should have been where people find a sense of community. It should always have been the place where people knew that they could come and that they would belong and that they would be loved and they would be nurtured and they would be accepted. But somewhere along the way, we lost that. But it was there at the beginning. It was there in abundance in the very beginning. In fact, when we get to our text today, picking things up where we left off last week, no, we're not talking about Peter today, so calm down. But we are talking about the early church. We are talking about church that was there. And when we see that church, I think what we're going to see is the most beautiful example of community that we could possibly find. We're going to be in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. So if you got a Bible, go ahead and do that, or turn there. But as we are there, we're given a glimpse of how this early church operated and how it functioned. This is not a huge passage by any stretch of the imagination. But understand what this passage does show us is a church in community. It's going to be the foundation of the rest of this series. So maybe after we finish reading through this text, you want to throw like a piece of your bulletin or a bookmark or something in there, because I promise you next week we're coming back to this text. All right, but here's what it says. It says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And awe came upon every soul. Many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." I want to remind of exactly where we are as far as the timeline of the early church goes here, because I think that's really important for us to keep in mind here. Because we're given this picture of what the early church looked like and how they functioned together as a group immediately after where we left things off last week. After Peter's incredibly short sermon that was so moving and so stirring that it led to 3,000 people coming to know Jesus for the very first time. And so while we don't have an accurate number of exactly how many people constituted the early church, we know, or we can safely assume, that it was 3,000 and some change. Right? It was at least 3,000 people. And yet when they came together, when they would gather up together, they functioned as a community with one another, doing everything they could to make sure that they cared for each other, that they saw to each and every person's needs. As we see this picture of this early church, it is a beautiful glimpse of what it looks like. But understand, this is at the very beginning. They are literally just trying to figure out what this thing called church is supposed to look like. There is no set regimen. There's no set list of things that are supposed to happen week in and week out. There's no schedule. There's no nothing. Jesus told them how to function with one another. He didn't give them an order of service to follow every week. Right? Some of us, we know the order of service before we ever walk in. We've got a mental checklist that we're doing. How much longer until I can go and get some tacos or something? Right? It's Mother's Day. Take your mom to somewhere better than Pancho's Tacos. Okay? Unless that's what she wants. But understand that this church functioning within this community, they work together. They had no idea what church is supposed to look like, and so they defaulted to the thing that made the most sense. A community of people encouraging each other, building each other up, drawing each other closer to Jesus. This group of people didn't know what to do. And so instead of trying to invent the wheel for the first time, they just said, let's just be a community of folks who get together. They became a group of people that strive to serve one another, to teach one another, and to encourage each other in their faith and in their. They're trying to figure out this whole thing. They would watch as the apostles would do things that only Jesus could have done, but they were able to do so because they were so deeply rooted in the Holy Spirit. They wanted to make sure that everybody who was around them, everybody who was part of the family, had their needs provided for them, so much so, and we're going to talk more about this because this blows my mind. They sold land, property, possessions, doing everything they could to make sure that somebody who is not blood relation to them was taken care of. That every need within their community was met. This group of people created such a perfect picture of church in community that I don't know about you, but I certainly would love to be a part of something like that. To know that no matter what struggle I'm going on in my life, that I've got a support system around me that's going to make sure that I don't walk that road by myself. I want that. And the thing of it is the people of that time period did too. Because again, as we look at that last verse there, at verse 47, it says, "And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved." This community that was fostered among the early church was so easily noticed and so easily sought. It attracted new people in every single day. The people of that time period recognized that this group is creating something that I want, that there's an internal longing within myself to have exactly what they have, so maybe I can come be a part of that. It was so attractive that more and more people were being brought to the feet of Jesus because of what this early church had fostered in its community with one another. Church experienced the greatest growth that it's ever had in the first few months of its existence, simply because they fostered community. And yeah, absolutely, they faced problems. Right, we're going to talk about those in the coming weeks for sure. You can't get two people together without inevitably having conflict, right? I'm strongly convinced that if there were only two people walking God's green earth, they'd find something to argue about. But else, as they faced those conflicts and those trials, they still sought to maintain their sense of community. That was precious to them. And so it's not hard to see the difference in the church of Acts 2 and the church of 2025. I would imagine that simply by reading through that text, you were able to spot some glaring differences in the way the first church functioned and the way the church functions today. Somehow, some way, we lost the sense of community that we had. Maybe part of it is that we just took it for granted in the first place. Whenever we take things for granted, we don't tend to think much about them. So when it goes away, we hardly ever recognize it. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm prone to believe that maybe part of the problem of why we lost this sense of community is because we started focusing more on an individual level of faith. We like to throw terms around like my personal relationship with Jesus, my personal walk with Christ, my personal faith. And don't misread me here. There's absolutely an individual element to faith. There is absolutely a personal element to every person's faith. But there's also a community element to everyone's faith. And yet somehow as we've recognized that, hey, the sense of community is going away, we've not been trying to raise the bar on it. In fact, we've been lowering it. Roughly 50 to 60 years ago, whenever sociologists and people whose responsibility it was to track people groups, whenever they said the phrase, committed church member, they would refer to somebody who was attending their church at least 3 out of 4 Sundays a month. In about the mid-'80s to early 90s, that term, committed church member, began to shift, and they started using that to refer to people who attended church at least twice a month. About 15 years ago, all the way up to today, whenever you see a sociologist or somebody who tracks people groups and they use the phrase committed church member, they're referring to somebody who attends church at least once a month. Now, please don't misunderstand. This is not your pastor trying to guilt you into coming to church more frequently. That's not what I hope you know me well enough by now to know that's not what I'm about. But I think this does speak to our loss of value of our sense of community. That as the church, we don't value our sense of community the way that the early church did. We don't even value our sense of community the way it was done 60 years ago. Of what it means to be in community with each other. And yes, while there is an individual component to our faith, understand that the majority of the New Testament is written about how we are supposed to function with each other as a collective community of Christians. In the New Testament alone, there are over 50, and I even saw some guys who were estimating it was closer to 100 instances in the New Testament where the another appears. That's a lot. And it's not like they're all confined to one book. But there are instances where this idea of one another are there. And nearly all of them speak directly to how we are meant to interact with other Christians collectively. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32 says, "Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you." Mark chapter 9, verse 50 says, "Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will it be salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another." Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 says, "Bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive." Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 18 says, "Therefore encourage one another with these words," and I could easily go on, but we'd be here all day. Because so much of the New Testament is about how we as the church collectively are to function with one another. There are very few instances in the New Testament where they're talking about the individual. And most oftentimes when they do speak about an individual in the New Testament, they're talking about how do you handle the situation as a group with that individual. The way the church was always meant to function from its earliest stages was always as a community. And instead, we've turned it into a gathering of individuals. And so we have to ask the inevitable question, right? How? How do we get that back? How do we regain that lost? How do we get back to where maybe the church of 2025 can start looking a little bit more like the church in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47? How do we recapture that sense of community that was so attractive that people came day after day to try to come and be a part of that? Over the next few weeks, we are going to look at certain elements and attributes about what it means to be a church in community and what that looks like and what if we want to regain that sense of community. And I really sincerely hope that you want that. Because I sure do. But everything has to start. Everything has to start, and the foundation of it simply must be our love for one another. I know. Wow, the main point of the sermon is love each other. For my next key piece of information for you, maybe it's a good idea that you drink more water, right? I told you they'd laugh at that, Mandy. Anyway, but here's the thing. Of those 50 plus one another passages of the New Testament, the one that is most frequent, the one that shows up more than any other is the phrase love one another. It outweighs every other instance of one another by far. By far. It is the most frequent phrase that is used is to love one another. And so this whole idea has to be important to us. Romans 13 verse 8 says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one that loves another has fulfilled the law." 1 Thessalonians 3 verse 12 says, "And may the Lord make you increase and abound in love for one another and for all as we do for you." Ephesians chapter 4 verse 2 says, "With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love." Colossians 3 verse 14 says, "And above all these put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." And 1 Peter 4 verse 8 says, "Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins." As I look at Acts chapter 2 verses 42 through 47, even though it does not say it expressly, As I see this church that is selling off land, possessions, whatever they have, in order to make sure that the needs of other people are met, how can we describe that as anything other than true, genuine love? It is the root of everything that we do as a church. If we have any shred of hope in recapturing within the church of 2025, it has to start with love. Because if we don't have that, we're not getting it back. If we don't have love for one another, we are not going to get back any sort of sense of community. And in fact, Scripture is actually pretty clear that if we don't love each other, then the truth is that we don't love God either. 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 says, if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, then he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Again, we're going to discuss other elements and attributes that we need to recapture if we want to get us to community within the church again. That's going to be a big part of what we're going to be talking about throughout this entire time, but understand that every attribute that we describe from this point going forward, it has to come from our love for one another. It has to start when we make the commitment to love each other. And yes, commitment is a very big word. And for some of us in this room, it is a very scary word. But it has to be the word that we use. We are going to love everyone who walks through those doors to join with us, or in a couple of weeks joins us outside as we're hanging out. Whether that person has been a part of this church and we've been sitting down the aisle from them for decades now, or whether it's their very first Sunday with us, their very first time walking amongst us, please, Christians, love first. Make the decision that whoever it is, regardless as to what their reputation is, regardless as to the mistakes they've made in the past, regardless as to what they may have done or said or whatever, make the decision that you love them before you ever say hello. We use the term in the church all the time. We refer to each other as our brothers and our sisters in Christ. Do you mean that? I have a brother. He's about a half inch taller than I am. We don't know where that came from. My mom's 5'1", my dad's 5'10". Just a massive recessive gene, maybe. I like to think it was, all the steroids and chicken in the 90s. But I have a brother, Blake. I love my brother. I'd do anything for that kid. Absolutely anything. If he called me today, said, bro, I need you, I'm hopping in the car. I don't even need to know what it's about. I don't know that I could say the same for some of the people in this room. And yet I'll call you my brother or sister in Christ. Community. If we genuinely want community, it starts when we love. Without love, we don't have a shot. We have no chance of recapturing community. Jesus himself said in John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35, and we'll close with it, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.